I'm not preaching about money. So I'm going to ask you to use your imagination. I have a 2-year-old, so we use our imagination a lot. Sometimes he uses his imagination on things that I don't want him to, but that's okay. So I want you to imagine with you one of, lots of people here do tasks. You know, Saturdays in our house growing up was like for cleaning. Anybody grow up the same way, or your parents make you do like, my parents would turn on the radio, it was like usually like mariachi or like something like that, and I knew it was time to clean. Okay, so I want you to picture that. Whatever cue you knew it was time to clean, that's what that's what you're picturing right now. That cue, you're cleaning, and everything is going smoothly. Okay? You're like accomplishing tasks, you're like getting things done, you haven't, you're like, okay, yes, check that off, check that off, check that off, right? Feels good, right? You feel this sense of accomplishment of like, yes, I got this. Let's imagine you're washing the dishes. This is my least favorite chore. I don't know, for those of you, this is my least favorite chore. Because it's like tedious, and then, so anyways, so you're washing the dishes. Everybody picture yourself washing the dishes. You have a window that sees outside the backyard, and it's a beautiful day. It's a gorgeous day. You hear the birds chirping. Again, you've already accomplished all these tasks on your list. This is the last thing you have to do. So it feels good, because you're getting to that last dish, right? You're like, yes, this is the last one. I have a dishwasher, so I just like rinse and put it in the dishwasher. But growing up, we didn't have one of those. So I had to, so whatever is your way that you do this. But here you're on the very last dish, okay? Feels good. You're like, I'm about to be done. Yes, and then you remember that it's a little too quiet and that you have a 2-year-old. So it dawned on me, oh my God, it's really quiet. I'm about to be done. I haven't been interrupted for 45 minutes. Something is up. Emmy really likes these little snacks. Emiliano likes these snacks. Look, he's going to look at this right now, right? And he loves these. And so again, it's quiet. I'm on the last dish. I'm like, yes, I'm getting things done because I have little kids with me. And then I walk into the living room. And what do you imagine I found? Just take a guess.
Painting.
Yes, painting. That's a very better thing than I would have said. Some finger painting experiences with applesauce all over the couch. All over the couch. And in that moment, as you can imagine, your day that was going so well isn't going too well at that point, because now you've got another mess that you got to clean. But not only that, it's all over the couch and all over him. The good thing is it wasn't all over Agustin, because he was asleep over there, so he hadn't gotten to him. And so, because that has happened. And so here, I have this very strategic moment when I can do one of two things, right? I can speak life into Emiliano, or I can speak death, right? That's true. And whatever I do will cause him to doubt, right? Did I do something right? Was I supposed to do that, right? And that little moment of doubt that he has, because I'm his trusted person, right? I'm safety. When Emiliano gets hurt, where does he go? Mama. When Emiliano is like frustrated or upset, or he wakes up in the middle of the night, it's often, more often than not, it's Mama. So I'm his safe person, right? I'm his trusted person. So whatever I say to him, it matters deeply, okay? And so, that sort of little moment of doubt, that like sense of his like, oh, I don't know, I thought I was doing something cool, like painting with applesauce, and I'm exploring like what it means to texture and all this fun stuff. He can start to doubt himself based upon what I'm going to say, right? And I can imagine that the disciples were not too different than Emiliano or too different from us. Have you ever had those moments of doubt in your life where you are chugging along, doing things, you think things are going well, and then something happens and you're just like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I'm good enough for this. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Recently, I just left a job that I have been at for 10 years. I built a whole career in higher education, and I left to go into the public sector. Completely different avenue, completely different job, whole other set of skills. And there are lots of moments where I feel that, and I have felt that. And I think it's true of this particular passage. This is Jesus talking to his disciples. So Jesus is using a parable, which he does often, and was used often in that time. And parables are sort of like stories that you've probably heard in your family, but they have like a moral lesson at the end of it, right? There's like a moral, lesson, right? There's like something you're supposed to think at the end of that. But parables were interesting because they were also meant to make you act. They were meant, it wasn't just like, let me process this information and internalize it. No, it was meant to make you do something, right? So they were not passive, they were active. So here Jesus is teaching his disciples, and he brings up this story, this parable, right? Jesus had been teaching right before this on a bunch of different parables. And the parables that he's been teaching are like the lost coin, the lost son, the lost sheep, right? These parables having to do with something being lost and then something seeking after them to retrieve them. So these parables come right before this parable. And then after this, Jesus is going to, spoiler alert, is that a fire alarm?
Amber alert.
A what?
Amber alert.
Oh gosh. Is that my phone? Oh. Is that a sign? should I cut this short? I don't know.
Time's up.
I don't know what it means. Okay, thanks. Thanks for coming. Let's go. Spoiler alert. That's what I was saying. That's an alert. Okay, that Jesus is preparing him because he's about to die, right? Shortly after this, he will go to the cross, and he's not going to be there anymore, okay? He's their trust person. He's their dude, right? He is their safety. Mind you, let's think a little bit about who the disciples are. They're just regular people, y'all. They were fishermen. One of them was a tax collector, right? These were just working class people, regular people. And I can imagine that they're up against the law-abiding citizens. That's why I picked this version, because I think it's so good. They were up against the Pharisees, these were people who knew the law. They had studied it, right? They had some other issues, like they added stuff to the law, but we won't talk about that right now. But they were learned people, right? They were scholars. The disciples were not, right? We're not talking about Paul. Paul's different. These are the people who actually walked with Jesus while he was on earth. They were just regular people. And I can imagine if they're anything like me, that they would feel some kind of doubt about their abilities to do all that Jesus was asking them, right? This doubt, this sense of I don't know if my skills that I learned as a fisherman are going to be valuable to bring people to Jesus. And here is this parable that God gives them, that Jesus says to them to say yes, right? I love the way that this text states it. It says, if you could put the paraphrase version of 8 to 9. Yes, this right here. I love the way he says this. He says, now here's a surprise. And mind you, as you are listening to this parable, this manager is not somebody you would hire, right? Any people hire here, supervisors you hire, it's not the guy you're going to hire, right? He's been ranking up a personal tab. That's not a qualification you want, right? But yet he is praised. At the end of this parable, he is praised, and it says, now here's a surprise. The master praised the crooked manager. And why? because he knew how to look after himself. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are on constant alert, looking for angles, surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right. Okay, so that's the caveat. That's the condition, right? So let's not be streetwise just for the sake of being streetwise, but use that giftedness, that resourcefulness, that creativeness to do the work of God. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly comforting, right? Because that means that not only am I encouraged to be creative and resourceful, but there are some things that I grew up with doing, or there are some things that I grew up in the neighborhood learning that are redeemable for God, right? That are and can be used for Jesus and his kingdom. Now, what is the point of this? You have been part of a series of hospitality, right? This is a series having to do with hospitality and how we can feel other people feel welcomed or part of or included. What more way to include them but to say those values, those traits, those things that you feel like are not conducive or don't fit in this nice little box of things or ways that you should act as a church person, guess what? They can be used for what is right. They can be used for what is right. Because here's the thing is that we have the ability to create culture, right? We create culture. Us as a church, as a people, we create culture. And consciously or unconsciously, we create culture, which means there are things that we say we value and things that we say we don't value, right? Both consciously and unconscious, which means that how I act and do and treat is just as much as the things that I don't say. And you know this is true because if you're in a relationship and your spouse gets mad at you for something, sometimes it's because of something that wasn't said, right? Can I hear an amen? Right? We get upset with our spouse for some sort of unspoken expectation. Doesn't just happen in our relationships with our spouse. It can happen with our relationships with our parents. It can happen in relationships with our friends. There's these things that we just do not say. And then we expect the other person to know, like they can read our mind. Guess what? They can't. At least not yet that I know, right? And so here, in this text, we see this reassurance, right? This reassurance to the disciples, because this is who he's teaching. He's talking directly to the disciples. He says, streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are constant alert, looking for angles, surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you to creative survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials, so you'll live, really live, and not complacently just getting by on good behavior. Just getting by on good behavior. We like to act really good in church, right? If you can't say amen, you say ouch. Right? We like to act very good in church, right? Here is also a call to authenticity, right? He's not saying don't be who it is that you are, be who it is you are, but be who it is that you are for good, right? There is, have any of you seen A Wrinkle in Time? Yes, it's a really good movie. It's part of a series of books, and in the first book is called A Wind at the Door. A Wind at the Door. And there's these characters that it talks about, and one of the characters that it talks about is called an Ephthros. An Ephthros are the unnamers. These are little evil creatures. In Greek, I was a theology major, not an MDiv major, so I Googled it. It's a Greek word for enemies, right? And so these little entities are unnamers. They go around seeking out good things and love, and they destroy them. And in this book, the little boy is sick And he's sick because these little unnamers are attacking him. And his sister happens to be a namer. Her name is Meg. She is a namer. She has the power to name, which is sort of the weapon to use against these enemies, these Xers. Well, the good news is, and the author got this idea from the book of Luke, and the good news is that you are all namers. The church are full of namers. We have the ability to speak life and death into people because we have been called, because the light lives within us, right? That we have been called to speak light into the world, but we also have the ability to speak darkness, right? With Emiliano, when he decided to finger paint with the applesauce, like, I'm his trusted person, right? So I had this ability to speak life or to speak death, right? I just started reading The Four Elements. Anybody ever read this? Yes. So one of the first agreements is, it's the four agreements, not the first elements. One of the first agreements is to be impeccable with your words. Impeccable. And impeccable means without sin. Without sin. And so again, because we are namers, we have been called to name and speak life to others because we have been named, right? Jesus has named us, right? We are his beloved with whom he is well pleased, right? We get to name others. Therefore, when we talk about hospitality, when we talk about things that we value, we have the ability to make sure that people feel valued and named. However, sometimes when we have been kind of created a little box of what makes sense for the church, we exclude people who don't typically fit in that box, right? By either the way that they dress, the way that they talk, the background they come from, their ability to understand certain things. And sometimes we do that unconsciously, right? So if somebody doesn't know when to sit or stand or to do a certain thing in a service, that unconsciously can describe for them whether they belong or don't belong. So a lot of churches have started actually talking through each of the phases of what happens in a service. This is when we do this, and this is why we do this, and this is why we do this, and this we do this. Not necessarily for the people who know, because guess what, you know. But for those who don't, right, who aren't sure, or maybe they have a question like, why do we do that? Or they feel more a part of because they understand now. So part of hospitality culture, or creating a hospitable space, is to be conscious of those things that we value and don't value because we are neighbors, right? Again, hospitality in that culture was a big deal. This was a known practice. Whenever you walked into somebody's house, there were certain things that happened automatically because that was part of their culture. So hospitality for us is basic as people of God. That's like your basic. Like we're not going to applaud for you to be hospitable because it's like who we are supposed to be, right? And so, but the difference is when you make somebody feel welcome, and whether, that saying, tu casa, my casa is your casa, tu casa es mi casa, right? My home is your home, you're welcome in my home. You'll know if you are truly a part of something if you can rearrange that home. Okay? Because it's one thing to say, you belong here, this is your table. And it's another thing to move the table and then see what happens. Right? Because is it really your table or not? It's not, right? If you can't move it, it's not your table. Right? And so we need to think a little bit more than that. How are we not just saying this is your table, but also saying maybe the table needs to move? Or maybe there are things in the table that don't need to be here. Or maybe we need to add things to the table. How do we allow everybody's voice to be present, to be spoken? So that in the sum of it is, typically this passage is the last verses, we can't serve God. We can't serve God and money is typically how the sermon is. But I was so struck by this idea Not this part, but the verse before this. Because I grew up in Southeast Fresno. And there are some values that I learned growing up in Southeast Fresno that makes me incredibly resourceful. Like MacGyver style. Resourceful, right? Everybody, you guys know what MacGyver is. If you don't, Google it, you young people. We didn't have cable. So like whatever was on, it was on. So MacGyver, right? So that's how resourceful I am. I can figure something out like this, right? I did not learn that in school. It was helpful in school, but it wasn't something that I was like, I learned in books, right? But I'm incredibly resourceful, which also makes me really good at a lot of different things. Because if I don't know it, I'll figure it out. So what are those values that are not part of the table because we don't traditionally feel like they should belong, right? And again, sometimes we don't always say that consciously or unconsciously. But I really love this parable because it says, streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. This is sort of a direct diss even to the Pharisees, right? Jesus is calling them out because remember, the disciples were regular people, like you and me. And they had doubts. And so again, you, church, are neighbors. You have the ability to speak life into people. And so be impeccable with your words. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for your goodness and your love. Thank you that your Spirit lives within us, God, that we are partners in the work that you are doing on earth as it is in heaven. So may we continue to echo that work. May we continue to participate in that work. And I pray, Lord, in those spots and places where we need to pause and welcome people beyond just the invite to the door, but also the ability to move whatever needs to be moved, God, that we allow those spaces, that we open up those spaces. God, we ask for that. We ask for patience in this process. We ask for grace both on ourselves and others, God. Just incredible grace, Lord, that you would continue to help us see those things that we don't see. That you help us to be streetwise, to value being streetwise. For those of us who bring those to the table, and for those who don't, open up conversation and dialogue so that we may learn and grow and be the people of God that you've asked us to be. We thank you, Lord, and we pray these things in your name. Now this